Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming. And coming to join us for this lovely panel chat about leading and learning, men and violence prevention. My name is Dr. Emily Harris, and I'm a research fellow at the University of Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences. And it's my pleasure to be chatting with these four excellent members of the panel. And before I introduce them, I would like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to start acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people, the traditional owners of the land on which Parkville campus stands, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. The university also acknowledges and is grateful to the traditional owners, elders, and knowledge holders of all Indigenous nations and clans who have been instrumental in our reconciliation journey. I'd also like to acknowledge that there is a long history of activism in the gender-based violence space from women and gender-diverse people, including those from First Nations and the LGBTQIA+ community. It's important for us to acknowledge that this activism has enabled us to have the discussions we're going to be having today about these important topics. And as a bit of background, so this is part of Respect at Uni Week, which is a cross-university campaign, and it's promoting the importance of respect, equality, and inclusion on our campuses and online spaces. This year marks the third that the University of Melbourne participates in this campaign. And the university is committed to eliminating sexual misconduct within its community. The Respect Action Plan for 2025-26 was published last December, and it builds on the university's initiatives completed in 2023 and 2024. Okay, so now I'll move to introducing our wonderful panelists. So we have Dr. Stephen Burrell, who is a criminology lecturer at the University of Melbourne. Stephen is at the end there. Welcome, Stephen. And Stephen completed his PhD at Durham University, investigating the role of men and boys in the prevention of gender-based violence in England. We have Daniel Principe, and Daniel is a youth advocate, an educator and nominee for the 2025 New South Wales Australian of the Year. Daniel is a board member of the DART Institute, an ambassador for the Women's Resilience Centre, and an ambassador for the national campaign Consent Can't Wait. We have Ethan Chou to my left. Welcome, Ethan. Who is the president of the Graduate Student Association, GSA, and a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. And to my right, I have Joshua Stagg. Joshua is the president of the University of Melbourne Student Union, UMSA, and a third-year Juris Doctor student. Okay, so kicking off, we have some questions that I'll be directing to our panel, and the panel will also be directing some questions to me as we discuss gender-based violence. So, here we go. I'd like to start with a question about community, which I think is really central to the discussion of gender-based violence. And I'd also like to start with kind of a wholesome question about community. So I'm putting to each of my panel members, what's a community that you're a part of, that you're proud of, and how does it enrich your life? And I might start from my right with Stephen.
Sure. Oh, can you hear me okay? Great. Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I think something I would say for this question, I suppose just to give a bit of background for myself, I suppose I got into this work when I was a teenager. I was studying sociology at school, and I started learning about feminism as well as other kind of critical theories. And feminism just had a huge impact on me, basically. It helped to make sense of like so much that was going on in my life as a teenage boy, you know, lots of the pressures and expectations I was facing about being a man and how I felt quite uncomfortable with a lot of that. And so I suppose, you know, ever since then, I guess I've been on a gradual kind of journey of learning from feminism there. And because of that, I suppose if we're thinking about community, I've probably lost some friendships, right? Some friendships I found hard to maintain whilst being the person I wanted to be. But I've also gained a lot of friendships as well. I've learned so much from like many women in my life, colleagues, friends who I've met through this work. I've also been really lucky to meet like lots of amazing men who are working in this area, like Daniel. I run a podcast as well, and we had Daniel on the podcast. So I'm hugely privileged to meet some amazing people working in this space, and to create friendships with men which are kind of real and authentic, and where we're not kind of constantly competing against each other or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It's a great answer. All right, I'll throw over to Joshua now.
Hello, thank you for having me. So I worked full-time in between my undergrad and coming here for the RSPCA Tasmania in policy. And one of the largest bits of work we were doing was a program called Safe Beds, which was providing temporary care for the companion animals of victims of domestic violence. So my time working there was really what opened my eyes to just how the extent of these issues in Australia. And so I'm still in very close contact with the people I worked with there. So a community I'm very proud to be a part of.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. You can hold on to that. That's a great answer. And Ethan.
Test. Yes. When you say community, I closely tie that to my identity. I was born in Canada, so I'm Canadian, but I also grew up in Taiwan, a big part of my childhood. So to be able to experience the Taiwanese culture and, well, Canadian Western culture, and now being here, I feel like has really enriched me in a way where I can understand different cultural perspectives. I also am part of the LGBTQIA+ community, and that just brings another dimension to, my ability to see different perspectives, hear different perspectives, and understand different people. And this is the identity part took me a long time to figure out when I was younger, in middle school, high school, and I feel like everything is just coming together now, and still I am working on that currently.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Ethan. Daniel.
Thank you all. What a delight to be here. Stephen, lovely to see you again. And I really resonated with your comments about fitting in. Even for me, growing up, mostly raised by a single mum as an Italian boy in Australia, feeling disconnected between different cultures, and even doing more traditionally masculine things, feeling a sense of unease and suspicion about where I fit in the world. And I think for me, I've had to re-find myself in communities over and over again. I've learnt to love things about my heritage, but also be quite suspicious of some of the patriarchal things that were just normalised for me growing up. I think for me, because I'm always traveling, communities are a really fraught space for me right now. It's actually genuine, something that I think about often, because I've been in 4 different cities in the last 3-4 days. So trying to think of what is community, and so it's very scattered. But what I do have is like bubbles that I enter into in every city of people from diverse backgrounds who I'm just so grateful for their friendship. And I think one of the things that I love about this space, as much as people can carry heartaches and hopes in this work, is I've just found such a sense of solidarity, such a diverse group of voices that everywhere I go, I'm connecting with people who are doing their utmost, I guess, to make the world a safer, kinder, more inclusive place. And I've felt that for me has just probably given me light and life in some of the harder moments in this work.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Daniel. And thanks to all of you. I think it's nice to start with some of these questions that can kind of give a sense of something kind of personal to each of you. And really lovely communities to share. Daniel, I'm going to stick with you for the next question. So this is sticking with community, and it's kind of continuing on from that to ask, what's your view on the role of community, especially amongst boys and men, in reducing violence?
Yeah, I think to myself of being a young boy and just taking my cues from the people around me, what they celebrated, what they laughed at, what they valued, and how that constrains our social norms, our expectations. And that you look up to older men, you're taking cues. And I'm not saying that's the only thing that would shape young people's attitudes or a young boy's attitude, but I saw the power of it when, for me, I found a little bit more courage, a little bit more groundedness in myself to hopefully attract and find myself belonging to places where kindness, compassion, care, decency, gentleness, tenderness were also part of what it was to be a man and a young man. And that was just so liberating for me personally, but it was such a beautiful thing, and to see what that did in terms of how men showed up for one another, because it was like, oh, I can let my guard down here. I don't have to worry about being vulnerable, authentic, and having to worry, is the next person going to throw me under the bus, going to pressure me, kind of try and humiliate me to score points. And conversely, I don't want to suggest my friends and I are some cherubs living above the fray of everyone else, but gosh, it makes it a lot easier to live out the values that you espouse publicly when behind the scenes there are other people who celebrate and value treating all people with respect and care and not shaming that. I remember my first ever placement as a young boy. I was 15, 16, my first day doing volunteer work at a nursing home, and you look up to somebody, right, that is taking you under their wing. And I remember he asked my best friend at the time, Garth, if he had a girlfriend, and Garth said no, and then I said that I did have a girlfriend, and his first response was, so you've got it on tap then? And that was like me as a boy who didn't have fathering figures in my life, that felt really alienated, and he was sort of someone that I looked up to, and I thought, oh, here he is in a caring role, something that I was interested in. I then worked in geriatrics in a former life, and yet that was the first kind of impression that he made when I finally thought, oh, here's a template that bucked the trend, because he was doing, a caring, heal kind of profession. And that was my first experience. And at that time, I didn't have the confidence to be able to challenge that or what to do about that. And I think since then, being around other men that have helped to normalize not only not tolerating that, but actually saying and doing something about that. And I certainly see in my work, boys are taking their cues from the world around them, what gets celebrated. And that tells us a lot about our culture. Is in my work, I see boys shamed for decency, for kindness, respect, for being loving especially. And I ask the younger boys why that is, and they say it's because it's seen as weak and feminine. And now I'm not suggesting that we build a statue and celebrate basic human decency from every teenage boy that embraces that way of being. But I know if we don't place a value on it, and especially a value in male masculine culture, we're not going to engender seeing enough of that. And that is certainly one of the challenges that I'm trying to push back on and celebrate the good when I do see it. Because sadly, boys pay a cost for that, and we need to shift the dial on normalizing decency. Sorry if I just spoke too much.
No, that's fascinating. It's a great answer. And I agree with you. Obviously it can be really jarring when you have someone that you consider to be a role model express these views that you would not agree with or not align yourself with, and that you find perhaps a little bit abhorrent. I've been thinking about this a little bit too, and it can be really difficult in the moment to know how to respond. I also kind of think sometimes silence can be quite powerful, and it communicates a lack of agreement, and I think it also sometimes forces people to kind of reflect on what they've just said. So I think the mere act of just not endorsing that can be a really powerful move. And I think we kind of all talked about how community is quite central here and important to think about as a way of kind of shaping norms and regulating behavior. So we've talked about how we might kind of think of behavior regulation and people kind of towing the line as something that we do because of laws or formal structures, police, them kind of keeping an eye on us. But there's a huge amount of things that we do that are based more on community regulation, not wanting to be ostracized, not wanting to do something that is perceived as inappropriate by the people we respect. And that really kind of sets a tone for what everyone is going to be doing and saying, and also attitudes, what people are thinking. And those kinds of things that you can do within your own communities around either speaking up or remaining kind of critical of anything around gender-based violence can have a huge impact on reducing gender-based violence. So I'm going to shift now to my next question for both Josh and Ethan. And it is, do you engage in conversations about masculinities with your friends? And I might go to Joshua first.
Thank you. Yes, I do. I would say the vast majority of my friends are female identifying, especially after I moved here. But growing up in Tasmania, you know, it's very small, so you're with the same people you've been with since kindergarten. And it's a bit difficult because you're growing up with these people, and it's the same circle from when I was, 6 to when I was 20. And I think the analogy I use is like the frog in boiling water. You don't know when some of the things that start, the people that have been your friends for a long time, they start to act in a way that isn't correct. And it's just these little things that build up over time. And I think by the time I left to move here, I sort of looked around and realized I don't know who these people are anymore. Their behavior is not something I want to support. And I did try and raise it, but I didn't. Maybe if I'd had those conversations earlier when we were teenagers, but I didn't recognize it then. I didn't know much about it back then. Maybe it would have been different. Yeah, it's difficult to know when to raise it. Yeah, it's tricky.
It is, yeah, it's really tricky, especially if you're feeling like you're coming up against a lot of resistance and you kind of think, what's the point? Yeah, and I think also at that age, it's an awkward time too. People don't really necessarily want to be told that that their friends disagree with them. Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to throw it over to Ethan now. Yeah.
Yeah, I do as well, and most of my friends are also female identifying. But just remembering growing up in Taiwan, I get primed by, my dad, my grandpa, talking about when am I gonna get married, stuff like that, which is tied into masculinity, the expected behavior of men. And you're not allowed to cry, things like that. But then things gets worse. There's a lot worse stuff. So yeah, I kind of have to. I kind of grew up with that, and I share it with my friends. And also being a vet, I go to rural farms a lot. I remember this time. This placement I went to in South Australia in the middle of nowhere, and just like thousands of acres, just farmland. It's like the kind of farm where you go up to a hill and all you see is farm, and it's just one farm. But there's a couple of farmers I worked with, and that weekend I was going to Adelaide just for the weekend. Yeah, because being a farm can be isolating. Yeah, and I remember the farmer said, are you gonna come back from Adelaide and bring me girls? And then at the moment, I just kind of like laughed it off. And that's the kind of thing I also shared with my classmates and friends, especially in the vet world. We experience that a lot. And I feel like it's really helpful to just have that open conversation with people, encourage people to talk it out. But yeah, me laughing it off, I guess, it's not difficult to talk to my friends about it. I find it difficult to, at the moment, I felt like I had to play along and laugh it off. And that kind of ties into what you said, Daniel, rewarding kindness. And what you said, maybe silence could have been a better way for me to approach that. But yeah, I think that's the difficult part. I didn't have the support around me to, not say anything or say something about it. I didn't feel safe to. I mean, I'm in the middle of nowhere. So yeah.
Oh, totally. And I mean, it also raises that point of safety, which is a really important one when, yeah, you're a queer identifying man in rural South Australia on your own talking to someone who says something a bit off colour. And yeah, it's hard to know how to respond in the moment. And so I definitely wouldn't beat yourself up either. Yeah. It could be tricky to respond to that with like, oh, are you lonely? You know? Probably not what he was expecting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had 2 more weeks after that with the.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow. Gosh. Yeah, thank you. And so kind of on this theme of reflecting on masculinity and being a man in the world, my next question is for Stephen. And Stephen, I know you think a lot about masculinity and gender in your research, in your day-to-day. And I'm interested in your reflections on how being a man has affected you in both positive and negative ways in your life.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess one thing to say is I think over time I've come to understand I'm quite a sensitive person. You know, I'm quite an emotional person. Although actually I think we're all very emotional, really, aren't we? Yeah, and I think that, I guess that's something which, I guess throughout my life I haven't been very good or comfortable at kind of expressing. It's still something I really struggle with now, actually, you know, in my relationships, for example. I think I've been affected a lot by this idea that, like, we as men need to be separate from others, you know, we need to be detached, we need to be independent, we need to be self-reliant, we need to figure things out for ourselves. You know, this idea every man is an island, we can't really ask for help. Yeah, and that's something I've really kind of, you know, that's really solidified in me in quite a deep way. And so even if I know on a theoretical level that it's ridiculous, you know, we all need help and we're all reliant on others, I still find it really difficult to actually take that step. So I think that's something which I'm trying to challenge and to model that to others, that it's okay to ask for help. I guess another thing I'd say is that because of what I've said, you know, that I always felt quite uncomfortable with what was expected of me in terms of being a man. But yeah, not really, as others have said, you know, not really knowing what to do about that. I think throughout my life I've actually felt quite lonely at times, you know, like not feeling like I fitted in, but not really feeling like I knew who to go to or if there was anybody else out there like me. So I think that's something really important, isn't it, about us talking about this, because it shows actually that we're probably all struggling with this stuff, and if we are brave enough to reach out and ask for help or just to start a conversation, actually maybe we realise we're not as alone as we think we are.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So, yeah, that sort of makes me think a little bit about a community that I'm a part of. So I take singing lessons, and my singing teacher is a young man, and I think about music and that being a space in which people feel a bit more comfortable to be vulnerable. And so I guess it makes me think about, okay, not only can we try and find those groups that make us feel comfortable to express our emotions freely and we feel supported, but we can also maybe find ways to introduce into the existing groups that we're a part of to make people feel comfortable expressing emotions, connecting, not feeling like you're alone, and yeah, trying to inject that into our existing groups, I think, is a nice opportunity as well. It's funny to me, I think, that music allows that. It does seem to sanction this quite open expression of vulnerability and emotion. And so this is a little bit off script, but do any of you can you think of levers that you can pull with your existing friendship groups or communities that seem to open people up a little bit and get them to feel comfortable expressing emotion? And I'm thinking kind of especially groups with men as well. Yeah, so I'll maybe ask either Joshua, Ethan, or Daniel.
I've actually found, like, sport, and I say this, I actually spend a lot of setting up my conversations with boys about how, like, sport for me in high school was the one place that I wasn't humiliated and ridiculed and called so many slurs for being a soft, sensitive boy, because all of a sudden it was like, we're on a team here. We've got in our common goal, and you succeeding actually helps me succeed, and like vice versa. And it was tragic for me to think back, and I certainly wasn't thinking this when I was 16, 17, but looking back on it now, like there was permission structures for boys to be emotional, you know, express joy and celebrate each other, and like physical touch is completely normalized in sport. You're allowed to hug each other and be so affectionate, and it's just fascinating that especially in Australian culture, is where there is so much license around that. And that's where, of course, it's a bit of a double-edged sword of like sport can also reinforce so much harm, and I've said that many times on the ABC around particular sporting events around the year, but it can actually engender that and some support and inclusion if done well. And it depends on who are the leaders setting the cultural tone here. What are we celebrating? And I have friends who are both past and present athletes, and they talk about the fact that so much of the rest of who they are as people just wasn't recognized in a sporting context, that wasn't allowed to come to the surface. But I think there is a loop into that in terms of, some camaraderie, some solidarity, if it's not just purely a win at all cost, but we're actually interested in who you are as a person, and this is just one facet of it. I actually think there are some loops in there. And for me with boys, it's just like I'm always trying to empathize with them. I'm interested in accountability and justice and all these sorts of things. But first, I try to imagine what it's like to put myself in the shoes of not just boys, but all young people. Because I don't know about you all, like puberty and adolescence. Anyone want to do that again with a smartphone in your pocket? Like anybody? Any takers? It's usually what I get from adults, you know, like, and to think like, what is it actually like for them? Now, that's not a free pass to treat other people poorly, but I feel for all the conversations where I'm inviting boys, I got to get real first. And I also have to try and put myself in their shoes and say, hey, I haven't always got it right. And I feel like that certainly does invite, not for every young person in the room, but for a lot of them, a bit more of a permission to be real and say, I'm on the journey too, or I'm learning, or these are some unfair stereotypes, or I don't like it when women or minorities experience this, because we've kind of sat there. It'd be good to not have to do that, but I think just dealing with the realities of humanness, like I have to humanize them first so that we can hopefully expand on that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had also thought about sport as another opportunity. I think it's a huge opportunity where people do feel like a part of a team. They're with their friends. They feel more safe to kind of express themselves and talk openly with people they trust. And I love the physical touch, the butt pats that I see. I'm like, it's great. And it's a wonderful opportunity for people to talk. I agree. And it's just about kind of trying to navigate and manage that culture to kind of keep it in the good zone. Not to be too black and white. Did anyone have anything else they wanted to add?
Yeah, I think sports helped me to an extent, Daniel. But then I turned my focus into art in high school. So that was like almost 10 years ago. I look like I just came out of high school.
I love that you feel that. That's so good.
I still feel like that. But yeah, I think that's where I truly found myself being a part of a community where I'm able to fully express myself. I mean, I was in school plays, I did drama, but in drama we have to practice emoting what we feel. If we're vulnerable, how do we express that through our body expressions? If we're angry, how do we express that vocally? Things like that. And it's that in that environment where we get to start sharing things openly. And now that I'm in university I've been in university for 9 years, not 9 years, 7 years. I've started to lose that because you kind of drop the side hobbies with what usually is arts or sports. And you start to focus so much on your career and, you know, all the other aspirations, you kind of lose the ability to express vulnerability that I feel like I used to have more in high school. Yeah.
I totally get that. Yeah. Maybe we should all join improv classes.
Yeah.
Joshua, did you have anything to add?
Just briefly, I want to double down on music. I remember, I was growing up, it was do not cry, do not talk about it. Just keep it inside. And that was very common, especially in Tasmania. And I went to a concert when I was 18, and it was a very emo artist. It's in my emo phase where I dyed my hair black. And I looked around this concert and I was like, there's like 50 men who look like they probably do a trade, and they would never talk about it, but all of them are here connecting with this music that's talking about how much pain they're in. And yeah, even though they weren't able to talk about it, actually being there and connecting with that music, that was powerful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thank you for backing me on the music. Yeah, front. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think it is a sign that, no, of course men have really deep feelings. Like, of course they feel sadness and hurt, just like everyone does. It's just that there are, I think, sometimes fewer opportunities to express it. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears into some kind of heavier topics related to gender-based violence, so kind of getting more into the heavy stuff. So some stats that Stephen's kindly provided. We know that it's clear from reports that gender-based violence is a critical issue in Australia. And so this is some research from Queensland University of Technology, QUT, and the Australian Institute of Criminology that tells us that the last few years, the estimate is that about 20 to 25% of men have perpetrated some form of sexual violence. And so one kind of implication of that is that when we're in a group with, let's say, 5 men, there's a chance that one of them might have committed some form of sex and gender-based violence. And it's quite a chilling statistic. It's quite, I think, difficult to process. For me, it sure is. And we kind of wanted to open up a chat about how that makes us feel. What do we do with this statistic? What kind of responsibilities do we have? And so I will throw this out to everyone in terms of, how does that statistic make you feel? What are your thoughts around it? And I might go over to Daniel first, if that's okay.
Sure. Sorry. Just my mind was going. It just cuts to the core, really. Because it's not just statistics, is it? Like, these are real people. These are our family members. These are our loved ones. These are our friends. These are our neighbours. Like, this cuts to the core of our human experiences, and too little, so little has been done to address the drivers and the factors that have so normalised this, where we've become desensitised. I'm conscious I'm going to speak from the heart, so I'll flag this up that I might say some things that are a bit challenging, because every day I'm trying to confront rape culture in schools, and that's not pretty. It's not that I'm there to shame people, but it's like I'm not here to just talk fluff. I'm not here to just skirt around what's going on here. I want to bring this to light so that staff, parents, students can see the realities of what's being completely normalised and what we've become desensitized to. I think it's really difficult to sit with those stats. Different people split it different ways in terms of perpetrators, and that very few are the kind of sociopathic monster that we kind of like to tell ourselves. And someone like Chanel Contos in her book would highlight the entitled opportunist, someone with low empathy who just sees a moment, a power imbalance, and a situation to exploit. And that probably makes a lot more sense of those numbers. These aren't necessarily people waking up to go out on a rampage to harm others, but they certainly have attitudes and ideas that their entitlement trumps another person's well-being, desires, safety, etc., etc. And so trying to challenge that is where we're at as a society, is what has enabled that, what has so solidified that in sadly too many hearts and minds of men. And so, in my work, every single school, and I can say this probably with nearly more authority than anyone, is that every school, tens of thousands of times, I have asked young people to put their hand up if rape jokes, rape threats are being heard and normalised. And I can tell you in every school, in every postcode, in every part of Australia, 100% of hands are up. And it's happening at school, and it's happening in their online chats, on the school bus, and they acknowledge it. They just say, this is where we're at. And then I ask them to reflect if they know a victim survivor of sexual assault. And anywhere between 15 to 20% of hands will go up in that space. If I'm in a regional town, a lot more, I think, because of the nature of smaller towns. And then I just ask them, and by this stage the room is pretty heavy with silence. And then I ask them to reflect on what does that say about our culture? What does that say about us as humans, that this is something that's used as a joke, as a tool to have power over the others, to humiliate others? And I try to exhaust every answer sitting there with a hand up in the audience. And for me, I'm under no illusions that by taking every cohort through that reflection piece, that great, I can go to bed at night going, great, we fixed it. But one of the things that I'm deeply troubled by is the callousness, the kind of apathy, the lack of care, and trying to do something about that, especially in the hearts of boys and men, to get them to care deeply about this. And that for me is the task before me, before all of us every single day, that they would see themselves as getting to play a very active part in this. That we need them, and we need them to care deeply.
Yeah, so I am conscious, I want to give everyone a chance to speak, but I just wanted to ask a brief follow-up question, Daniel. So I agree with you, and kind of changing hearts and minds is the key goal. Has there been something that you've found that you kind of feel is particularly effective at doing that?
I think trying to spark in them a vision for themselves as to what it would be like to be a young man who is safe, loving, kind. And I don't just say that and move on, but like try and get them to sit with that. And I don't just say, like, not just in your imagination, but do the women and girls, do the other people, do the people who are overlooked, bullied, ostracized here, would they say that about you? But what happens if we could be a little bit curious and go on the journey to become that kind of person? And I say, I haven't arrived. Like, I want to be that guy. And I need the help of all people around me, not just men, to become that guy, to learn from them, to see that and to embody it, and to go on the journey of reflecting on my shortcomings, my limitations, my biases. And I say, but like, let's dream. What would that actually feel like? What would that do for one another if we could actually embody that? Not every moment of every day, but if that was the main trajectory of our life. Because I could teach them consent all day long, but as I say to them, if they don't care, if they don't have empathy, then I'll just fill the room with hot air. And so I'm trying to get them to imagine what that would be like and what that would do for every person who now felt like they could embody themselves, let alone take up some space in the world around them without having to be on guard about, is this person, gonna do something to make me feel scared, uncomfortable as a joke or real, or is he just being nice to me because he wants something, but he's gonna throw me under the bus if I'm a friend, or he's gonna perhaps do something a bit icky later if I'm someone he might be romantically interested in.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So that does sound like a kind of a big factor in getting people to start imagining this kind of aspirational self, getting clarity around what that looks like, what are the moral codes I want to abide by, and that process of imagining starts to kind of shape how you see yourself, and that's going to be really key for affecting how you're interacting with others. Yeah, nice. Okay, so I might go over to Stephen now. So reminder of the question is, I guess kind of reflecting on this statistic and how it makes us feel and what do we do about it?
Yeah, well, I suppose it makes me feel, guilt, shame. It always has, and I think that I mean, it's easy, first of all, isn't it, to just think that this is an abstract problem, that that's something going on somewhere else, that it's nothing to do with me. But I guess, yeah, like if I really reflected on it, then I think, well, actually, how does this connect to my own behavior, you know? Like how, because that's the thing, isn't it? It's easy to see, even with a statistic like that, it's easy to see the perpetrators as being this special group of people who are out there somewhere else. But actually, like, this connects to all of our behaviors in our everyday lives, you know, and I've done all sorts of things in my life, right? Which, if I look back on it, it makes me feel guilt and shame, you know? I've participated in the objectification of women, you know, I've stayed silent when I've heard sexist, racist, you know, homophobic comments. I've used pornography, you know, like most, you know, I think all of us have done things, right, which we're not proud of. So it's easier to, I think that's why we feel so much discomfort, right? So the only thing I would say is that I have found that it's hugely kind of like generative, I suppose, to not push away from that. Because it's so easy to do that, and there's so many people out there wanting us to do that right now, right, in society, to fall into the backlash and think, well, no, like I don't want to have to change, like who I am. I want to stick with this idea of being a man that our society is putting forward. But in the end, that's clearly not doing us any actual favors in the long run. But it's clear, yeah, it's not doing anyone in society any favors. So I would just say that, yeah, I think we need to sit with that discomfort. And think about what we have to learn from that, you know, and recognize that none of us, exactly like Daniel was saying, right, none of us are perfect. We're never going to be perfect. We're all going to continue making mistakes. But I guess the important thing is being honest and having humility and listening to women in our lives about what they're actually experiencing on a day-to-day basis, thinking about how that connects to our own behavior, and thinking about, yeah, what can I actually do to be more like the person I want to be like, which Daniel's describing, yeah.
Yeah, Stephen, absolutely. And yeah, I guess one thing I'll kind of extract, I think, is this really important point you make around the fact that it's people in our lives, not these shadowy figures, people that we know. It's people who are all imperfect, as we all are. And yeah, I mean, I also don't think we need to kind of beat ourselves up too much if we haven't had the perfect response. I think there's some research around. You ask feminists, you know, how likely are you to intervene when you hear a sexist remark? And most of them say, oh, yeah, very likely. But then in the reality of the moment, very few do, because it's kind of shocks you. And it's not always clear how to respond. But it's something that we can kind of work with over time, I think. And also be clear in ourselves what we agree with and will kind of want to continue doing in terms of attitudes and behavior into the future. And yeah, I think in terms of like, what if we do realize someone in our life has committed gender-based violence, engaged in some kind of sexual misconduct, and it's a person that we know, like, love. It's something I had to deal with a couple of times, and I remember thinking at the time, this is one of the most psychologically uncomfortable positions I've ever been in, where I feel this deep ambivalence around someone that I know and love, and an awareness that they've done something that I, you know, deeply disagree with, and find very difficult to sit with and accept. And it also raises this question around, okay, well, what do you do in response to that? Do you isolate those people from you? Do you kind of decide, no, not for me? Or do you talk to them? Do you engage with it? Do you try to address it? Acknowledging that we're all imperfect humans. And yeah, it's a question kind of, I think, on a case-to-case basis, but it's a difficult one. And I'll go to Joshua now.
Yeah, you know, when you hear statistics like that, you almost want to believe that it's the people committing these things that are just like Harvey Weinstein's. But in reality, you know, it is the people around you, some of them, and that's very difficult to confront. It'd be a lot more reassuring to believe that it was only monsters through and through that were doing this. Yeah, it can be really difficult to move forward from that. I remember, I have to be careful how I say this, a friend of mine, their mother went to a house for victims of domestic violence, and She didn't have a car, so I drove her there. And I wasn't thinking. I offered to help her move the stuff in. She's like, no, you can't come in. And I was young. I didn't really understand. So I was like, oh, okay. I thought the people in there have had horrific experiences with men. And when you get to a point like that, and it's something similar when you see statistics like that, there's two paths you can go. There's one where you can say, well, I didn't do that, so why am I being blamed for it? And then there's the other one where you can say, well, hang on, there's a much deeper issue here, and I have an obligation to be a part of trying to fix it. And I'm grateful that I was able to take that path as opposed to the other one. But yeah, I think a lot of people read these statistics and brush it under the rug and don't realize that maybe they or a person close to them are part of the problem.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really strong point around, I guess, it's an incredible kind of personal story of being faced with this experience and having that slight hint of defensiveness, which I can completely understand. And I think we shouldn't necessarily aim to have zero defensiveness, but to kind of question what to do in response to that, I think is really important, and go, okay, I could take that and go in one direction, or I can consider the alternative, which is a kind of another form of perspective taking and empathy, and go down that road. Yeah, thank you. And Ethan, I'll go to you next.
I feel like everything has been talked about, but maybe what I'll add is the defensiveness, probably just the tip of the iceberg, but under that, it's guilt and shame, the root of it. And also I'd add probably confusion. A lot of young men, I feel like, don't understand what a perpetrator is to start with. And when they do sit with this data, they said, oh, it's probably not me. And then, they feel defensive, like Joshua said. But then it's recognizing that if you're not a perpetrator, yeah, cool, but the issue is historically gender-based violence is from men against women, and you identify as that gender. So I think it's that plays a barrier to being able to express that empathy you're talking about. So I think it's just thinking of it as like working together, men and women, to change this discomfort into positive action. But then another question is, when I sit here and listen to everyone's answers, and I was talking to my partner about, I have to do this panel. This is kind of tricky for me. But then I guess I'm showing vulnerability by being up here. But he had a good point. He said, is this even the right audience that we're talking to? And, this important topic, and presenting the data to. Is this even the right audience? How do we reach, the core audience who really needs to hear this? I guess that's what everyone has to think about.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, Emily, a question, if that's okay.
Oh.
Because I was just wondering, I guess sometimes maybe as men, like one of our kind of responses could be like, okay, like how can I protect women? How can I fulfill that kind of chivalrous idea about being a man? Being the protector, being the hero, being the white knight. Like, how would you respond to that, I suppose? And what would you find, useful for men, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's difficult to balance the practicalities of the fact that women are at higher risk of being a victim with the desire not to maybe fall into a trap of being kind of paternalistic and overly protective. Where's the line there? And I mean, I think, yeah, I do think about this quite a bit. Part of my research is about something called benevolent sexism, which is a form of sexism that really kind of endorses this idea of having a Prince Charming and having a white knight. And it's a kind of quite romantic ideal that's really attractive to women and men. And yet it is kind of dangerous because it often undermines women's autonomy sense of being able to look after themselves. And yeah, it never really positions women as leaders, for example. And I do have people sometimes ask me, okay, like if I'm not meant to do that, then what am I meant to do? And there is some, I think, kind of common sense element involved when it comes to kind of protection against potential violence. So, you know, if it's kind of late at night and, you know, you might be with a woman who needs to walk home or walk to her car, offering to go with her is, I think, a kind gesture. It acknowledges the higher risk that she's at for violence, and it's, I think, a reasonable thing that she might feel unsafe. You know, then the kind of addition to that is that if she says, no, I'm really fine, and, you know, you kind of might be like, are you sure? Like, I'm more than happy to, but if she says no, then you can also trust that and not force it, and acknowledge that maybe she is completely fine, and you can respect that choice as well. And the other side to that answer is that it's, I think it's called benevolent sexism because it offers that protection to only women and only specific women. So only women you think of who are kind of subscribe to quite traditional gender norms. So feminine women, not really feminist women, and not men, for example. You might say to your friend who's a man who's walking home, do you want me to come with you? I think it's an equally reasonable suggestion given also the risk for men of violence. And so my other message is be benevolent to everyone, be generous with it, be very kind and supportive, and respect when someone says, no, I'm good. Yeah, but thank you for the question, yeah. And I'm just gonna check on the time. I think we need to wrap up in a moment. Yes, we do. All right, so.
Me, I was running late.
No, you're all good, Daniel. I might jump into Q&A, and then we'll try and keep it as brief as possible. Okay, so we have some questions that were submitted prior to the panel. And let me just have a quick look. Oh, okay, I'm gonna go for the second one, which is kind of spicy. It's also kind of, I think, particularly topical, given the show Adolescence, if anyone has seen it. I considered it my homework and watched all 4 episodes. I recommend it to everyone. So, okay, this question is, what are your thoughts on the role that our online environment / online radicalisation is playing on the current gender-based violence epidemic in Australia? Beautifully worded question. Are we doing enough to address this in our communities? Okay, so for this, I might actually go to both Joshua and Ethan, who are our kind of very much kind of people who are deeply involved in university communities. So Joshua, I might go to you first.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. I think it does hark back to what I was talking about before, when people are confronted with these things and they're given a choice in which way they're going to go. Some people, they're told, oh, men are committing this violence against women, and they're saying, well, I'm not doing that. And then they will point out that tiny portion of the statistics, which is men being the victims of domestic violence, and that's horrible. But they'll then, I guess, expand on that, and they enter their own silo, where they think, well, there's all this support going towards women who are the victims of domestic violence, and not men. And then that's why on the internet we now see like men's rights movements. I did see Pauline Hanson's calling for a minister for men, which is very on brand for her. And so, yeah, I think that's also a problem, that if we don't keep this conversation going, members of the community get these ideas and they start going down the wrong path, and then if they're just shut out from the conversations, they keep going, and then that's where we start to get to these radical positions that we're starting to see online.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. Ethan, any thoughts on this?
The question is about
Online radicalization.
Yeah. I feel like the social media just exacerbates that. People can just comment behind a mask and with no consequences. Yeah, and then you feel like you're distant enough from, you know, the rest of the world online. You feel like you don't have to do anything, and that's where, you know, the bad seed just starts to grow, and then it eventually creeps into real life. Yeah, but I don't really know if we do anything about it right now. Maybe this is something, you know, that's not looked after and that we need to pay more attention to in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially for students who, you know, work a lot of, do a lot of things online. And, you know, we did a study on research students about, you know, cyberbullying, about their research topic, which is kind of related. It could be related. But then those online things are so hard to prove, it can be harder for, you know, person who's being perpetrated to report. Yeah, you just, and for the perpetrated, they feel like they're not as responsible. They can hide, they feel like they can do whatever they want. For people who code, they can do that anonymously. So it's a very toxic environment. But I feel like, yeah, it needs to be talked about. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, I think excellent question, and I agree. And I think it's kind of eerie when I think about it. When I'm in a group of people in person, it's much easier to disagree or express silence or have a chat with someone, which doesn't have to be charged and a kind of throwing down of ideas in some kind of aggressive way. But in online spaces, there's not a lot of room for that. It's very much kind of teams against each other, and it's very oppositional, which then can translate into people's attitudes and behavior, which is concerning. I'm going to wrap us up, given we have gone over time. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us and spending your morning with us. We really appreciate it. And a huge thank you to everyone on the panel for sharing their stories with us. So thank you all.